Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today's Monday, so it's Poetry Monday. The format, people are going to read their favorite poems, including some poems that they themselves have written. Then we're going to have breakout rooms, and we're going to talk, we're going to actually make a poem, a collaborative poem. Maritza and Allan will talk about it in a few minutes. And then when we come back, we're going to read those poems, and we're going to talk more about poetry and art. So let's get started. Maritza, what are we starting with today?
Okay, so welcome everybody. Today we're going to be reading a poem from a poet who is long gone. He's from the 15th century, and it's Andrew Marvell. And this poem is a dialogue between the soul and the body. He has a couple different poems that are dialogue poems, and they're phenomenal. And so we're going to read this one in a kind of a duet style here. Shrikant will otherwise be known as the soul this evening, and I shall be the body.
Wonderful. A dialogue between the soul and the body by Andrew Marvell. Oh, who shall from this dungeon raise a soul enslaved so many ways, with bolts of bones that fettered stands in feet and manacled in hands, here blinded with an eye, and there deaf with the drumming of an ear, a soul hung up as it were in chains of nerves and arteries and veins, tortured besides each other part, in a vain head and a double heart.
Oh, who shall deliver me whole from bonds of this tyrannic soul, which stretched upright impales me so, that mine own precipice I go, and warms and moves this needless frame. A fever could but do the same, and wanton where its spite to try has made me live to let me die, a body that could never rest, since this ill spirit it possessed.
What magic could me thus confine, with another's grief to pine? Where whatsoever it complain, I feel that I cannot feel the pain. And all my care itself employs, that to preserve which me destroys, constrain not only to endure diseases, but what's worse, the cure. And ready off the port to gain, am shipwrecked into health again.
But physic yet could never reach the maladies thou me doth teach, whom first the cramp of hope does tear, and then the palsy shakes of fear, the pestilence of love does heat, or hatred's hidden ulcer eat, joy's cheerful madness does perplex, or sorrow's other madness vex, which knowledge forces me to know, and memory will not forego. What but a soul could have the wit to build me up for sin so fit? So architects do square and hew green trees that in the forest grew.
Thank you, Maritza. What do you like about this poem? Go ahead.
I mean, it's a whimsical look at it's the struggle that we deal with constantly. It's this idea of, we're a body, but we are soul. And then even, especially for someone who is re-examining their faith and those philosophies which they hold most dear, I find this poem and several others of this artist are just, they do a really good job of looking at it from just a different angle. the idea, like, it seems almost like playful and whimsical to imagine that the soul feels belabored by the body and vice versa. Because we usually think of them as, well, they're inseparable. They're brothers. You don't usually think of them as wanting to be free of the other. And yet that's kind of the dance we play all the time. Like, are we going to be mindful of, material, worldly things, or are we going to focus on, the intellectual, the spiritual things, that are not tangible? And so this is to me, it's a really fun way to present that.
Wonderful. All right, folks, go ahead and type ! to read Raven. No, sorry, read whatever poem you would like to read. Go ahead. Okay, Joe has quicker fingers. So Joe, go ahead.
Sure. Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. It was many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love. I and my Annabel Lee, with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her name and me. And this was the reason that long ago, it is in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabel Lee, so that her highborn kinsman came and bore her away from me to shut her up in a sepulcher in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. By our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we, and neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea, can we ever dissever my soul from the soul of beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing my dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee, and the stars never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so all the night tide, I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulcher there by the sea, in her tomb by the surrounding sea. I actually wasn't going to read this poem, but a friend of mine actually just lost his wife of 43 years. And so it kind of reminded me of that, of this enduring love that they had, and that it stings quite a bit about losing your companion, but that love can endure past someone's passing. So I think that's really one of my main takeaways from that poem.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Allison.
Okay. All right. So should I read? I'll read the one I was planning, or should I do Raven?
No. Please read what you're planning. I was just
okay. All right. So this is it's by Fred Moten. And this book, the poems will go on for like 10 pages sometime. So I only am picking an excerpt of one, but the actual poem is called The General Balm. Okay. So I just got this yesterday, so I'm not that familiar with it. We bear the atmosphere. How can we carry on? Life across what lies between, spun by an engine that can't be between. because that's how near we are. We near as difference can be, which is absolutely near. Nothing is all that comes between us. To dance, how we cut Stevie. The history of weather is the closer we fall apart. The further we go, we come to nothing, like Stevie come to Donnie in the common vamp. You and I keep violently conquering the nothing that comes between us. As we swim in brackish waters, lady be begging good, lovely, not going, don't go, go, gone in the difference, if there is any, but it still be going, fallen in a dream we have when we be falling right there, that little off we keep between us. Is a passage we love, resonant hum, invisible to the traveler, rubbing actions and events in flicker, Loa beholding, media inversioning, in always middle traveling, Samaya freshening the field, and then unfading into nothing comes between us. I think what I like about this poem and just this book in general is this amazing way that he just plays with language. And he sometimes puts things together that don't seem to make sense, but then when you keep reading it, it does. I mean, I feel like he's not like finished, like some of these older poets, you can tell like the poems we still have today, they're like the best of their work. And I feel like this poet is not there yet, but he just seems like he has so much potential. And, they're just, I don't know. I think it's, pretty interesting.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Allison. Next up is Maritza, followed by Paul. Maritza.
So I am actually going to share with you guys a personal poem of mine. So yesterday here in the United States was Mother's Day. Mother's Day in most Spanish-speaking nations is actually May 10th. So that would be tomorrow. So I'm going to share with you a poem I wrote called Miss My Mother. And for you guys, this would make the 25th Mother's Day I will be spending with no mother. The notion of unconditional love, a warm hug, a smiling face just for me. I am the most important thing in your world. No question, you'll be willing to offer comfort whenever life devolves me into tears. I miss the idea of you. Homemade soup and ice cream when I'm sick, accompanied by your fussing and concern. On good days, we'll just sit and share, seeking advice, trading tales, old and new, basking in a bond impossible to replicate. I miss the idea of you. These notions so silly in their portrayal, definitely not anything I've experienced. You and I, fast friends, we never were. In fact, you were quite the reserved guardian, while I was just the love-starved charge. But I miss the idea of you. Sometimes I get upset and emotional. I miss my mother, wish you were here. But you were never those things I dream. The mother-daughter love was implied, not shown. I have no basis for knowing about that bond. But I miss the idea of you. Thank you, guys.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. Thank you. Next up is going to be Paul. Paul, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. Maritza, that was really quite a beautiful expression. And a little story quickly. Last week, I went out and I interred the ashes of my mother where my father is buried, but along the lines of Joe's poem. I had forgotten, it's been a long time since I've been out to his grave, but he had bought what they call a second right. And I had forgotten that on the stone is the words, my mother's name, her birth date, so just waiting for her death date. And then at the bottom it said, together forever. And that was just like amazing to that point of Joe in that poem. And also to Marissa's point, they didn't look like they were so happy all the time. But there it was on the stone, together forever. So sometimes it's under the hood, the love, you know. Anyway, I saw this on the way back. I stopped in Amherst at this concert and I saw this dance concert and there was this prompt. I mean, there was this line in this dance performance and it was a perfect poetry prompt. And I don't know if Allison and Maritza, you're ever going to do this, but I would love this group to start with a prompt with both groups and take it from there. You probably know what I mean by a prompt, but this line was, this branch of reality is no longer available to you. It was in the middle of the dance performance. So what a perfect line to start a poem and to give a group and say, okay, what are you going to do with that? So here's what I did with that. It's stream of consciousness, and I'll read it for you now. It's a stream of consciousness kind of riffing off of that. So take it in that spirit. And maybe an example if we were to ever do such a prompt thing one night together. Okay. This branch of reality is no longer available to you. What? This branch of reality is no longer available to me? You better have some pretty heavy authority. Are you sitting on the mountaintop where you can see every peak and valley? Jesus, Krishna, Alexa? Identify yourself. The bush is burning. We hear all these voices at once. We are on a collision course with the multiverse. Are we ready? Are we ready? I wish I could even say what ready means. This branch of reality is no longer available to you. Well, we may be on a collision course with the multiverse, but my own collisions are with the mundane. The toothbrush in the morning or the earbuds that fall out of my ears just at that important moment in the conversation. And suddenly, yep, that branch of reality is no longer available to me. I wish for things, though. My imagination can take me down a path that feels real. And why not? And who are you going to tell me that this branch of reality is no longer available? I'm going anyway. I will not be limited by your definition of possibility. And if I have to cross some line that some physicist says will reach me into a quirky zone of impossibility, so be it. Because, wait a minute, this branch of reality is no longer available to me. I get it now. It's all about control, all about your greed, about the purse strings that only open when the hunger is so obvious that you become embarrassed. But maybe those are the purse strings of all of us when we are gripped in our own fear of losing, waiting for our next step, when we have already taken too many for granted. Is this about the marriage of Mr. and Mrs. Money? You don't understand your treasure trove. You don't understand your own restless longing that lies underneath, that never brings satisfaction. And you think you have all the world available to you, all the branches, but who am I to question? Your desire to hold yourself in your own arms, congratulating yourself on your success, and telling me that this branch of reality is no longer available to me. You have a certain definition of freedom, don't you? You, not I, can truly say that all possibilities are open. But is the size of the field of possibility really determined by your credit limit? Is this branch of availability of reality not available to me because my credit score is under 700? Really? What a sad definition of freedom. What a pitifully small definition of possibility. Wait. I just took a breath. I just let the beauty of this moment pour through me. I just took a bubble bath in pure spirit. I can stand holding nothing, naked, clothed only in my consciousness, and find my way to the field of impossibility. And you can't buy that. I dare you to drop everything. I dare you to be. I dare you to just be. I dare you to just be here with me.
Oh, that was beautiful. That was beautiful. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Folks, please go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to read any poem. So it'll be Brian. Brian, go ahead, followed by Jim.
Okay, this I can read it here. This is called Tiny Ant. What are you, tiny black speck? I have not seen your light before. But here you are walking all over my papers. I need a magnifier to know you. Oh, I see, you are an ant. But never before so small I have seen. How do you do? Your friends are here now, everywhere. I know I can't harm you, but you cannot stay on my desk. I could extinguish your life with a finger. Just another life gone. You come all day and into the night. Is it a dance, or are you seeking out the crumbs I drop? Note to self, stop eating at my desk. Your life is brief, your outlook so small. Like for like, for you, I am a giant. And to me, you are part of the wonder of life. Walk on as you please. That's it.
Thank you, Brian. Would you like to speak about what you like about the poem? Okay, let's go with Jim. Jim, go ahead. Oh, just a second. I need to unmute everybody. Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, hey, I can unmute now. I guess just really quick. I have a choice of three, and I would like to invoke some mild criticism. That's okay too. So the first choice of three, please choose between weapons of war, the reparation, or navigating in the age of discovery.
Navigating in the age of discovery is my choice. Anybody else? Okay. All
I
right.
second that. Navigation
All
in
right.
the age of discovery.
All right, well, hopefully I can make it through. Okay. All right, hang on, let me scroll down to it. All right, so navigating in the age of discovery. This is something that I wrote. The ones who come before me were called to the horizon. Many answered the curious call and prepared. Many heard the siren-like calls and chose to plug their ears. They turned away from the call because they seared their connection with principles. Those who prepared sought to enlighten themselves and forge a new identity. Captains prepared to set sail on the unknown reaches of their imagination, rallying the vessel through sea trials, preparing to say goodbye to their Arthurian hearth. The critics were skeptical because they lacked the fortitude to do anything. They act on frozen loop of immature knowledge and experience. On the day my forefather set sail, his understanding of the world was without form. His naivety, he was naive and did not fully comprehend the trials ahead. Like Magellan, he studied the helm while doubt crept into his mind as the shore diminished. Using his spirit, he reached back for the final embrace of his wife. The captain set his principal course with known charts and answers the call to the horizon. The first trial comes in the confines of his journal, writing by candlelight, penning his hopes, dreams, fears. Meanwhile, his sword hangs behind him. In these solemn hours, blissful respite and foreboding illusions are created. From the helm, Captain, look on the horizon. Thor is there to meet us. He seeks to test our resolve. The captain reins his Athenian faculties and charges forward with Spartan resolve. Lightning, wind, shards of rain began to expose the weakness of our resolve. Then a rogue wave slams into the ship, causing minds to splinter and wash away from the unforeseen. Stir to yourself, for even the unholy union of Thor and Poseidon will not deter us. stand fast to courage. The ray of divine sun saves us from undisciplined and imaginative peril. Damage was sustained, and for a while drifting was medication and stagnation. In this moment, the captain penned doubts manifest themselves in the crew. The once unified split into damnation and salvation and defamation of God. The hearts and minds of the vessel begin to expose unevaluated paths of knowledge and maturity. After several days adrift, resources, entities prevail, enabling the vessel to begin anew. The less useful sow the seeds of discord. Luckily, the captain remains resolute. Land ho, the sights and smells of land excites the crew. After many months at sea, they reach land, begin to explore its wonders, and are renewed. Wonders exist in the highest of heights and deepest depth. The wonders of the indigenous and the collision of ideas that shake mountain and distort principles. Ideas that the captain brings on board and carries with him in his journals of his journey. As the captain reflects in his nightly ritual, he challenges these new principles. He seeks an answer from God and charts his imagination and once again sets sail. For unforeseen reason, the vessel is caught in the desert of a doldrum. The ship is breathless and stagnant, allowing the minds of the resentful to water their seeds. Embittered sailors infect and possess members of the crew. The rest find the endurance and inspire the crew to turn away from the growing ungoliant. In the moment of a civil war and corruption was averted, giving time for the wizard Aeolus to find the emaciated ship and breathe life into its dying sails. The sanctity and foundations of harbor cradles the familiarity of civilization seen on the horizon. The captain is hailed and his spirit is recognized as Achilles, Odysseus, and Aeneas. The fellow captains offer words of abodement, purpose, and hard truce. They urge the captain to be careful. Do not forget where you come from and where you are going. After traveling for 12 years, the spirit of Odysseus manifests, plotting a course home. He traveled the known world, revealing and carving his Homeric masterpiece. Along the way, he saw ships trading the enslaved and self-imprisoned. The captain vowed he would never trade with those enslaved. In the captain's complacency, unaware he was sailing to encounter the devil himself. In the distance, another ship was plundered by pirates who corrupted hard-earned treasure. These pirates betrayed their sacred oaths of the divine and generated their own morality. The two captains locked eyes, piercing the shadow and reflecting off the dark ego. The corruption was so complete, searing the divine connection. The pirate was immortal death itself, existing in a foreign plane. The forefather, empowered by his sword, became both master and commander. He needed to flirt with death and in the fight empathize with what could have been. The fight was brutal and deadly. This time the captain survived, and death never forgot and embodied the necessary musical tension. My forefather traveled this earthly realm. The Achilles made it home, full of treasure, stories, and ideas. The treasure made the town richer, and the library of humanity grew with discovered knowledge. The ship made it home to the familiar, slightly changed, and the skeptics were shocked in disbelief. New adventures set sail, emboldened by my forefather, using the charts he made. Penelope, when she saw the familiar sails, rushed out to shore. The lighthouse burned brighter with renewed vigor. Our captain went out again, this time with his prodigy. He showed him the charts, the sandbars, and new ways to reach unforeseen places. Those earthly places that challenge our principles help us grow. Soon you will be able to artfully apply the knowledge you have gained. Soon you will understand the journey of others is different from yours. Friends and enemies he met in faraway places shared and exchanged ideas and insight. He would freely give his knowledge to anyone who asked and never shy away from principled conflict. He would give new captains a warning, fan their purpose, and assured them their mistakes will be different. Soon his son sat on the shore after his father had taught him everything he knew. He saw his father sailing a vessel alone with a crown of earned gray. His son saw the familiar sails on the horizon, the black flags. Death was waiting for the spirit of Aeneas to come home to his Etruscan home. Turning to lock in with death, a spectacular exchange of fire took place. Then, as if the heavens opened, a shockwave of light rocked the world. For a moment, the captain reached the pinnacle of art and maturity before entering the cosmos. The son saw humanity in purpose and death, as if it were part of a greater design. The captain overcame death on a journey to a new home found by no chart. Death, to this expert navigator, was a friend who helped him sojourn through creation. Death was the tension to the navigator that enabled the divine, humbling sailors. Death was only a divine gatekeeper in the age of self-discovery, a story anyone can write on their journey around the world, penned in the collective experience of man.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. It's wonderful to have you and to have you recite these poems. This is just great. And I mean, one of the topics I would like to talk about in the discussion period is the power of these mythological characters. Because in this single mythological character, you just mention it and a whole context comes to your mind. So
that's what I found with poetry as well. Like I could put so much into a loaded line with the right characters in the right places.
Wonderful. All right. So for breakout rooms, Maritza, which topic shall we do?
I thought we were going with integration.
Integration. Okay, that would be good because that's kind of the theme of the poem, the soul and the body. That's the theme that we are working on for our Comprehensivist Wednesday, kind of integration of faculties. How do you bring them together? What's the tension between them and how do you resolve them? So that's the general topic. The breakout rooms will last for, let's do 20 minutes. Again, this is going to be smaller groups. There are going to be 2 breakout rooms led by Allison and Maritza. And after 20 minutes, we'll come back here to read the poem and then continue the discussion, starting the breakout rooms now. Welcome back. All right. So who would like to read first?
I'm good with it, unless Allison desperately needs to go first. I don't hear her saying nay, so I'm going to go ahead.
You can go first.
All right, okay. We draw our lines, we filter the light. Are we the forest or are we the tree? We reach out to all who are there, touching everywhere, holding me, holding you, touching roots for safety. If you look but superficially, you think we are one and alone. Intersections, pathways, webs, veins upon veins connect out of sight. We are a host, not just alone. We see your every move. We celebrate our resiliency as we absorb the rain and share. Our falling leaves provide a blanket protecting our roots. One branch may break and fall, but our roots remain strong and vibrant. Lean against our trunks and become part of our world. Your lines of individuality shall blur into ours. Come, share in our love. You are welcome. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. Alice?
Okay. The Rite Aid burned, the tear gas choked. America cried, where do we go from here? At first, we brought the enslaved to our shores. We sought to subjugate the land. We fought our war to free us from our tethered sovereign. Then, with the stories of the honest brother fought, wait, that sounds right. Honest brother fought against brother. Then we embarked the greatest crusade while we tried to reconstruct and equalize. The little girl walked with her head held high. Why would a little girl walk with such courage? Because she saw Lady Liberty in their eyes, because even in their eyes, they believed in the American dream, this great symphony that requires a composer, and the composer integrates the American experience.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. So a couple of things. It's a small group of people today. So we have a choice. There is a considerable amount of choice that we have. So there are a couple of things I wanted to, so we can propose many things that you would like to talk about. We've been talking about poetry a lot. So any aspects that you want to elaborate on, anything that you want to focus on, you can go ahead and propose it. So think of it as kind of another breakout room. One of the topics I do want to look at is the topic of mythological characters and what they do, because you've spent a lot of time studying myths. Jordan Peterson, Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, a lot of that. And, Greek mythology is amazing. We're looking at mythologies from other cultures as well. So that's one topic. Maritza, do you have anything that you would like to put on the table? I want to ask everybody, so anybody can put anything on the table, then we will go ahead and discuss some of these topics. Maritza.
In addition to mythology, I like symbology. I'd like to discuss what people think of symbology in their poetry or in poetry that speaks to them.
Beautiful. Anybody else? Okay, let's start with that and let's see where we go from there. So what do you guys think about the use of myths and the power of myths? What do you think about symbols as such? And let's start with mythology and connection of that with symbols. And then we can look at, go from there. So go ahead, type exclamation mark. Or raise your hand in Zoom if you'd like. You can also raise your hand like this. I can see. All right, who would like to go? Paul, go ahead.
Well, the first thing that occurs to me is kind of a concern. I mean, I'm old enough to have been raised in sort of the classical education pattern where I know the myths. So, I mean, the use of myths assumes a context where it's shared. And I sort of feel like it's harder to find maybe now. Just comments on that. That's what first occurs to me about it. It's really important, but if we don't have the shared context, you can't use them or people won't understand them or. So there's a thought.
That's okay. So let's start with just that. The power of shared myth, because that was the function of the myths in the first place, because these myths were stories. These were morality lessons. These were different potentialities, human potentialities, and how they work out in life. And it was a dramatic way of holding on to them and sharing them in the entire culture. So that would be it was actually the first form of philosophy. People did not have explicit philosophy at that stage. What they had are these myths, but these myths captured the implicit philosophy, and that sharedness was crucial. That was the shared philosophy. It was through the myth that the shared philosophy was held together. So let's just focus on this question and then we will raise other ones. So let's see, Jim followed by Joe. Jim.
So when we look at shared narratives and shared myths and stuff like that, I would say our culture is aware of many things. It's from a historical perspective, it's a stringing of different facts and creation of new myths and new stories and new things that will fundamentally change, because they'll fundamentally change the art, the literature, the other things, because now they're drawing on different facts that generate those characters, those symbols, right? Because those symbols are in a way, what is it, one of the highest forms that people can interact with and enter into, what is it, the imaginal stage of imagination and engaging with that. So like let's take this for example, Virgil, right? So what does Virgil do? Well, Virgil, when Augustus comes along, he creates the what's effectively the Roman myth. He creates the Aeneid, and the character is Aeneas, the goddess of love. I don't know if it's the sun, but it's not the sun. It's like a favorite, right? Where's Aeneas from? He's from Troy. So he then creates an Odyssey and an Iliad across 12 chapters that explains where Romans come from. Lincoln in the 1860s and 1850s does the same thing for America in some ways, because he was a master storyteller. Dennis Goodwin hits on this, I think whatever, but she hits on this very hard. And he strings together a narrative from the founding fathers on. And so is it important? Yes. Is it important to use for symbology and for our heroes and stuff like that? Yes. That way people can articulate them and then embody them. However, I think one of the major issues is, and I think Young hits on this a lot, which is symbols die, which I think he identifies as Christianity is entering into its death stage, right? The symbols of Christianity are either going to die or be revived. And that is an interesting thing, because how do these things revive? Well, how does religion revive? How do these other narratives revive? And they revive through this process, and we're probably in that now, I think. So anyway, I think I said a lot there. Sorry if I went on for too long.
That's all right. We will have, today's far more relaxed, so we can cover, we can do it in more full form. Lot of interesting things. So I'm going to have other people comment first. Joe, Mike, and Allison. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that myth essentially is a way of explaining the unknown to a certain degree. And that's what, kind of helps us in another ways make sense out of, bring order to some degree of chaos, so that we tell ourselves a story. It's almost a hypothesis to a certain degree as to what's going on. And, then you can start to see certain archetypes actually that evolve out of that as well. But I see it as a very important function in telling and allowing us to essentially tap into our creativity, but also it's something that enables us to function at a certain point in a society. Like, stories are all that we necessarily have, and these stories sometimes become ritualized and they become religions, but these stories that are explanations, and they bring some degree of securities to people, these myths. So, I mean, that's a very important role that I think that sometimes gets overlooked. There's, sociological implications to this as well. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a part of evolution too. Anyway.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Mike, followed by Allison. Mike.
I had been teaching in several gifted and talented programs, and I think mythology in general, it's just an excellent on-ramp for kids because they really have, it's captivating for them. The illustrations in some of the better books are just incredible, and it's pure storytelling. And I think young people in general just eat the stories up. And because there's so many different avenues to take it, it spurs the creativity. So in all the programs I was in, I can't remember one that didn't feature mythology as part of the curriculum. I just think it's, for young people, a great start.
Excellent. Allison.
I think what happened was after World War I and World War II, we used to have symbolism and mythology like everywhere. All kinds of buildings, if you look up at them, and the carvings were very, very symbolic. And then I think what happened is after World War I and World War II, there were such horrific wars that we wanted to just turn away from that and wanted a new start. And so architecture embraced modernity, and dance became really like there weren't any more stories. Modern art, it's like in all these fields, it was like the same thing. But I feel like what happened was eventually by probably, I guess, the 90s, people started turning back to it because it felt soulless. And so you see like postmodern architecture. But I feel like we need story, we need history, even if that history is painful. Like I could understand why after World War II, they just had enough. They just wanted a clean break. But at the same time, like I read this great book by Milan Kundera called The Book of Laughter and Forgetting. And it talks about how when Russia took over the Czech Republic, they took down all the statues and replaced them with different statues. Then they kicked them out and they put them different statues. And then it's like this back and forth game with the statues. But the thing is, the history is important to who we are. Like who we are today comes from all of our history, good, bad, everything. And so the mythology and the symbols are an extension of that. And if we cut that off, who are we? We're no one. Yeah.
Wonderful. Maritza.
Allison holds a soft spot in my heart because not very many people bring up Milan Kundera, and I really do love his stuff. Sorry. I think that I will say that I don't entirely agree that mythology and or symbolism fell out of the collective consciousness, as it were. I think that we have always used some form of mythology and symbology. There are some types of both that are so integrated in certain societies or in certain cultures that we are not even cognizant of the fact that we're using symbology or mythology. What comes to mind for me is there's a lot of, Catholicism was something that was, pretty much forced upon many of the Caribbean nations that were conquered by the Spaniards and then the French and then, Britain and then the US. But it was so completely done, or so well done, that there exist bits that were integrating as a form of hiding and preserving. So, symbology was used to preserve mythology in certain cultures. And it was so well done that today there exist aspects that if you ask a Cuban or Dominican or Puerto Rican, they were like, oh, no, my family is extremely religious. We're super against any type of any other culture. And yet when you listen to or watch some of the rituals that are part of their culture, you can see ties to other cultures that are far more antiquated. And it's like the mythology of, some small tribe in Africa. How is it in this tiny little island so far away? Because it survived, because it pretended to be something else. And it's something like there's this fascinating thing where there's, I don't know if anyone is familiar with the religious of the honoring of the Oricha. The Oricha, for every Oricha, there exists a complementary Catholic saint. So, like Santa Barbara is also Oshun, and is it Oshun? No, it's not. Santa Barbara is I'm forgetting the name right now. But but it's fascinating to me that exists because these are mythological gods of another culture, but they got switched into a symbol of sainthood and called something differently so that it could live on. And it's fascinating because you can see that in, poetry and to me, ritual, music, dance, those are different forms of poetic expression. And it's so pervasive, and but it's fascinating that in some instances, it's so interwoven as to be almost indistinguishable.
Wonderfully, beautifully put. There's just so much here. Paul, go ahead.
Well, the thoughts in my mind revolve around a myth's lifespan, kind of related to the reference to Jung, and also, a myth, taking the creation myths, for instance. They have this lifespan where at first people actually think that thing happened. And some people still today think that, I'm thinking of a Lakota Indian. I think it's the Lakota Indian creation myth. It's so beautiful where this whole village gets washed away and there's one woman left and this eagle keeps visiting her. And he's immortal, and he gets to love her so much that he decides to give up his immortality, the classic story, and becomes husband and wife with her as a man. And that's how the Lakota Indians began. I think it's the Lakotas. But then, there's a group of people that's taught to kids that actually believe the myth. They think it really happened. But then it's used through history as it loses with science and things, its luster of, well, that actually happened, turns into a deep symbolic thing. And then is that the next phase of its life? And then does it have an old age where it dies? I'm asking these questions about, and are there current myths also how political systems try to create myths? I don't know if that's true of the Lincoln one, but I think as a kid, a myth grew up around J. Edgar Hoover in America in a very positive way. He was like a god. And a myth has grown up around John F. Kennedy, or in South Africa, the leaders there. But sometimes political systems try to create a myth, I believe. But does that fall in this category? So birth and death of a myth and how it's born and how it dies. Those are interesting thoughts that come to mind.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul. So I'll say a few things. I think so many interesting things here. I think about, kind of the way I look at it is the function of these symbols and myth, because they actually speak to something about human consciousness that we need integrations to live by. And these myths, let's keep the word myth aside, because myths are generally referred to only certain kind of these integrations done at a certain time by a certain culture. It's basically these integrations that hold our worldview of what the world is, what should I do, what society is. All of it is captured in these integrations or symbols or myths. And what happens is that they keep changing over time as they interact with other myths. The classic example of like what Maritza was talking about is India has this 10,000 gods. How did they come to be? As Hinduism progressed, whenever it touched a culture, it took all its gods into the Hindu gods and called them reincarnations of the main gods. So it was a way of integrating so that these people could keep all their gods. At the same time, the mythologies were integrated because there is this main gods, there are these, this is the incarnation of Shiva, this is the incarnation of Vishnu. And so there is some integration and some separation, people could continue to do that. So certainly, I think that is the fundamental question. What is the function of myths and how does it change over time? There is a huge thing. One of the things, if you want to understand America, one of the great, my favorite historian is a historian called David Hackett Fisher. He's done a book called Liberty and Freedom. And he holds that these are two very different traditions. Liberty comes from Southern Europe. Freedom comes from Northern Europe. And what he does in this book is that he looks at all the symbols that were used to propagate these two ideas in the culture. So the ideas cannot really be propagated without the symbols. So there is this back and forth between the integration itself, like in your mind, and its expression of it in a perceptual form, whether it be like visual things like pieces of art or stories. These are all ways of concretizing integrations. And human beings need integrations. And the world keeps changing, the context keeps changing, and the integrations keep morphing. But the fact that we need integration still remains the same. So I think there is, clearly kind of ups and downs of individual myths. But I always think about kind of the function of the myths that is serving and how these various functions of the culture are interacting with one another to produce the transformation of the myths. Next up is Jim, followed by Allison. Jim.
So I think we're saying a lot here, and I don't want to just really trying hard, not just to, here's a smorgasbord. So one of the things that I would say is facts happen in people's lives or something like that. With memory and thought and other experience, I think those facts become stories. And now we start to see the slope here, where it becomes stories, become legends of some kind, right? Like stories that aren't completely false, but have some grain of truth and so on and so forth. And to the point where we have myths of great heroes or something like that, or, Paul Bunyan from an American perspective, Davy Crockett, even though he was a real guy, he's blown out of proportions from a mythic perspective. And one of the things that I think is interesting in this conversation that you highlight, there's different myths for different people and different times and different places. So if they're also spatially different in space-time, right? Maybe they're trying to solve a problem that's present for them in that moment, right? And so these myths begin to bubble up because they're these stories. I mean, we see it in the American Revolution. We see myths from the American. We see it from the French Revolution. We see it when Germany was unifying, when Italy was unifying. We see it even in the darkest eras of our history. Because make no mistake, the Third Reich used myths. Okay, they really pulled back all the way as far as they could. the Soviet Russians used myths. They started from scratch. There's a story of a farm boy who sold out his father in order, again, the whole idea is the prophets and stuff like that, right? So like they took that and they used it. We see it, this symbology and this mythic-like structure when people interact with heroes, and they also interact with martyrs. We saw this, and this is what I see from like some of the George Floyd protests, right? We elevated him to a level of a martyr and that of a mythic hero. And so we do these things, and I think we have to, because it's the best way that we can invite people to engage with their imaginations, to see how they can interact with this. And because of that, those myths will always be evolving. Those narratives will be changing. And even if they're not 100% right, ladies and gentlemen, they don't need to be 100% right. That's the point. They don't have to be 100% right. They just have to carry the story, the plot, the more imperative, or whatever that is, the ideal. And then from there, our society learns from that, and it's perpetuated through culture.
Thank you. Thank you. The other small point I want to make is that many people who talk about kind of loss of myths, the main thing is that, you know, myths are also being created. So there is kind of this both direction. There is kind of destruction and creation going on. Allison.
Yeah, I think a common thing in myths is that you always have a quest. And so somebody has to achieve some quest. And that when they achieve this, it gives hope to people in their ordinary lives with whatever difficulties they're going through. The other thing I was thinking about was the idea of integration with myths. I feel like in America, we try to just act like the Native American. I mean, it's kind of like just clean slate and then create our new myths. And you still, you know, you see like names of rivers and, you know, you still see names of things, but we, in a large sense, acted like, oh, nobody was here and now we've arrived. But what's so interesting with Mexico is that you don't see that. You see, I mean, it's interesting because every country in, you know, the so-called New World, North and South America handled it differently. Argentina did the same thing like us. Like they just wanted to act like the indigenous culture never existed. But Mexico, like Mexico City is so interesting because there's an area right in the middle of town where you've got the Aztec ruins. There's like a dig and you can look at it, and then it's surrounded by Spanish colonial buildings. And so I think they did a much better job of kind of like taking the two cultures, or the various cultures, because also the Mayans, you know, everybody, and sort of weaving it together and weaving the myths together. And very, very different from us. Like even, you know, like in Mexico, there's all sorts of pyramids, but we have mounds in this country, lots of them. Well, they're in Ohio, even in the Mississippi Valley, and even there, I've seen them in Arizona, and they just act like it's not there. You know, like I went to this one place. It was like some kind of a historic site, and next to it was this building, like a mountain, but it was perfectly flat on the top, and both sides, it was like it was measured like that. And I asked the tour guide, I said, well, what's that? And I said, that must be a mound. And they're like, no, that's not a mound. That's just a hill. And I said, no hill is that perfect. It's not. And I said, well, why isn't it excavated? Why, like, and they just said, well, no, we just, you know, they just want to act like it didn't happen. But that is a myth in itself, to act like, oh, they got off the, you know, the pilgrims arrived and, oh, well, you know, thanks for helping us with that Thanksgiving. We like the corn. And then, you know, that's the end of that. And now it's us. And it's really tragic, this history that's gone, you know, or ignored. I don't know. It's just how it is, but it's sad, really. Yeah.
Thank you. For me, the most interesting approach to myths that I've seen is that of Carl Jung, where what he's trying to do is that he's trying to put all the myths together. Like most of the times people look at kind of individual myths with loving detail. What he's doing is that he's saying, okay, let me take in myths of all cultures and let me try to see what is common to them. What are the large themes that keep coming up? Because they are most of these myths are developed separately in separate geographical areas with very little connection between them. So if you find something pattern that keeps repeating, it is telling you something about human nature. So something very deep. So yes, Joseph Campbell is the best kind of, Jungian who kind of took that and kind of ran with it in a very big way. And I really like his work. All right. What are symbols, and what is the connection between symbols and myths?
They are the heroes, or the embody, or so it's like looking, maybe I'm wrong here. So what I would invite is, we have the story, we have the myth, right? Which we can act out, we can play with, we can write, right? But what the symbols that they become is a different conversation point, because we interact with symbols differently than we interact with writing or something like that, right? And so, we can do it. There's some, it's like Venn diagram at some level, right? There's going to be some overlap, but a symbol, maybe you can look up to, you can integrate with. By the way, are you guys familiar with Jonathan Peugeot's work at all?
Not me.
You might want to look into it, because his whole thing is the symbolic world. Like, this is right up his alley.
Mm-hmm.
So, but symbology in itself is something we can interact with, that we can engage with, that we can touch, that we can look up to. Look at every country. There is a symbol of that country. Lady Liberty. What is it? German had one. Whether it's an animal or a person, a woman, a man, a hero, something to that effect. Always something that captures that. So.
Joe.
That's actually where I was going to go with it. I mean, there's always a symbol that is, and sometimes it's actually recovered from like ancient times, to capture a concept, in order for us to, kind of rally around something. But yeah, no, it's something that, in a way, and I have not read Man and His Symbols, but that seems to me the use of, what is it, Medellas. Yeah, I mean, those are very powerful things that actually invoke certain emotions in cultures. And I don't know how it relates to the unconscious or primitive, kind of primitive myths, but I mean, that's an avenue to go down. But I was actually thinking about how countries have used symbols in order to kind of tell a story and to create a narrative and to actually rally behind a certain cause, and we can see this, just in America. We still see it actually, where people are using symbols many times to rally around a cause.
Thank you. Maritza.
I think symbol allows us to examine and explore things that we find ourselves incapable to do so when we're looking at them just from one straight arm perspective. Like, it allows us the distance required to put it under a microscope, as it were. And it also gives a way to kind of trick you into not realizing that you're putting it under the microscope, as it were. It's interesting because the the actual etymology is that, I think it's Greece. Greek, if I remember, it comes from Greek, and it means connected or similar, but it's, we use it as a replacement, one for the other. And I think that there's something about giving a thing. I know there's, people say a rose is a rose is a rose, regardless of the name you give it. That's not quite entirely true. The human mind is quite susceptible to trickery, and sometimes we need that. And symbols allow us that ability to view something with a distance or impartiality that we could not possibly give it if it were just faced head on. Just my thoughts.
Thank you. Jim, you talked about the work of these two Jonathans. Can you give a quick overview of how they approach this topic?
Okay, so there's a few people who I would recommend that are right up in this alley, right? If you follow Jordan Peterson, you're right in already with these people. So Jonathan Pageau's Symbolic World, he talks about a lot of things. He's an Orthodox Christian. He attacks things from a lot of different short stories, iconography in particular. Right, he's also an icon carver, and he will engage with those topics and say, okay, well, hey, here's what this means. Here's what this means. Like he does an analysis on face masks. He does an analysis on a lot of different things from a symbolic perspective, like current events and stuff like that. So I highly recommend Jonathan Pageau's Symbolic World. If you haven't already heard of it. The other one is Jonathan Vervaeke and Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Has everybody heard of John Vervaeke?
I don't think so.
Okay, this is definitely right up his alley, because he literally goes into symbology and why that is important from a cognitive perspective. So like really useful to go into. Awakening from the Meaning Crisis is a 50 episode lecture series, about 50 hours total. It's a haul, but it's well worth your time. Like if you please, it talks about this and talks about how you engage with symbols and how, for example, zombies, right? So here's a great example. Zombies we had all these zombie movies back in the early 2000s, right? We kind of still do, right? But what do they represent? Well, what is a zombie? Well, it's always trying to eat. It's always consuming, but it never actually is able to awaken itself and live again. So it's like breaking out of the rat race, breaking away from the herd, becoming your own self. There's a lot there that I'd highly recommend diving into, and how you relate not only to yourself, but also to the greater society as a whole. So that's Jonathan Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis and Jonathan Pageau's Symbolic World. Again, I can't stress it enough. They're great YouTube channels.
Wonderful, thank you. Paul.
Yeah, kind of the contrast to the indirectness Maritza talked about. I'm thinking about symbols, the ones that fascinate me. Lots of things do, but are the ones where they are actually imbued with a power, like the cross that stops the vampire, or where they are the thing. They aren't a symbol of the thing. Like the host in Christianity, that this is my blood you drink. When you take the wafer, it's my body you eat. Or I think, Shrikant, you can comment on Om. It's not just a word, it is the universe, or it's been talked about that way. So that's just a use of it that's kind of, instead of indirect, it's the most direct you can get experience of something that may be impossible to put into other form of word.
No, that's a great idea. Great point. And I can see that, for example, in the Catholic Church, when I went to the Easter service for the first time this year, I went to a Catholic service and a Protestant service, and they're very different from each other. Like the Catholic service, they use all the senses in order to make the conceptual perceptual. So the idea, I think this is John 5, I think, that I'm the bread of life. And when you eat the bread, you become the bread. It's not normally you physically you assimilate the bread into your life. Here, you get assimilated into the bread. It's a way, but it's a very powerful thing. And here you're actually eating it. And that is very, very powerful. Like in modern times, things have become very intellectual, very, this is the point that Mark Stallman makes really well. There is a difference between the scribal age and the print age. Print age, all the concepts, the way in which scribal age interacted with concepts was in this, what shall I say, all sense mode. You had people around the book talking about the book, the characters of the people was right there, the tone of the voice, emotion, their thoughts, you're going back and forth with them, and you're learning, you're seeing their actions in day-to-day life all around you, and you're learning in that context. The book exists and operates in that context. Whereas here, in print world, you're sitting with a book, you have no clue who the author is, and you're just going like this. So that difference of fully integrating, in this deep integration is something that the modern culture doesn't fully get. So the power that symbols once had is different than they have today. So thank you. Next up is going to be Allison.
I think it's interesting how what the symbols of the time are, like, what does that say about that society? Like what Jim was saying about the whole vampire thing, there was like, or zombies, there was just this whole, like about 10 years ago, it was like tons and tons and tons of books about the zombie apocalypse, or just an apocalypse in general, or the end of the, it's always about the world ending and 3 people are left and what happens. And I kept thinking, what did that say about that time that so many people were drawn to that? And what's kind of weird is how that there was that like obsession with it. And then 10 years later, we have this pandemic. And, we're not down to 3 people, thank God, but we're soldiering on anyway. We're making a life with this anyway. But it's kind of weird, like what, but it's not just that, like all these different eras in life, there's different symbols are really, really important to different eras. But why? Why are they gravitating to this one at this time or this one at this time? It's just kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Building up on the example of Om, because it shows actually a different dimension there. It's like the bread you eat bread. Om, you are saying Om. So it's like it is your creation, and you're trying to capture what God is while saying it. And then the crucial part of Om is you say Om and then you listen for Om. So it's like singing with God, and you are doing it and you get the feedback. So it's something that is in you, and you can do it anytime, and you can do it as much because there is more to discover. There is so much more to discover. So it's very powerful. Okay. Anybody else wants to bring up any topics? Again, call for topics.
Oh, I think I want to if you don't mind, Shrikant, I want to dial in on what you were talking about, like that idea of theosis, right? That's prevalent in a lot of areas, and I had to make sure I have my definition right, but it's the transformative process whose aim is likeness to or union with God. And this is seen a lot in the Orthodox traditions. We see it a little bit in the Catholic and the Protestant traditions, unfortunately, kind of rely only on sola scriptura in more ways than one, right? But I mean, it's just, it's amazing. Like Tillich, yes, Jonathan Tillich, or not Jonathan Tillich. Anyway, his last name is Tillich. Protestant philosopher. He actually addresses Paul Tillich. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I have way too many Jonathans in my life right now.
And Paul has too many Pauls in his life.
Exactly, right. So he's like, he talks about the double, like the angel, right? It's like, what is that angel? And maybe that angel is that future self that you're transforming into, that self and the future that you're transforming into. But the only way to do that is to actually participate with it in the present. And so then it's like your future self is pulling you into the future, into the future. God, it sounds really weird, but there's just so much there that symbols and our imaginations get to do with symbols as we reach and we participate, right? It's a participation, and where I think you were addressing something interesting earlier. We live in a very propositional world. This is another Vervaeke thing, right, that I picked up along the way. Ideas are also very mythic in a lot of ways. They spread just like that. So propositional, like, so, but how, so instead of participating at the bottom, going into a perspectival knowledge, going into a procedural knowledge, going into propositional knowledge, we're trying to inverse that triangle and just start with propositions. But how do we participate? That's the problem. Symbols enable that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. The one thing I would say is that, for those of us who are participating in the Gita meetup, it is very interesting, even the form of Gita as a conversation. So, I mean, Gita holds that, we are all children of God, that there is God in us. So when Arjuna is talking to Krishna and Krishna is talking to Arjuna, firstly, they are friends. So they're like equal. Imagine like and the way Krishna is talking to Arjuna is that he's saying that, look, I'm saying this to you, but you really need to use this to just get to the God within you and speak from there. It is not my words. Now, this is God telling him, okay, not my words, but you have to make the connection with the core in you, and then you speak. And when you do that, you'll become one with me. So it is the idea. And that through conversation. So even the Om itself is a conversation. You're saying something and then you're listening. So that is a very, very powerful, it's a very simple concept of conversation, but it's a very powerful concept. Paul.
Yeah, I mean, the area about this I'd like to go further into is the political, cultural side. I mean, I made a joke earlier on the chat about our fake news and myths, but it's not really a joke. I mean, I heard a thing on NPR about the election, I guess, in the Philippines with the junior Marcos is becoming elected probably tonight. But someone asked, because there had been a whole myth around who he was, and then all these things came out about his problems, his lies, his this and that. And they interviewed a guy who was going to vote for him. He said, I don't care. I don't care if they're lies. I like the myth. I think modern politics is at the extremes, and people want the myth and they don't care about the exaggerations that you talked about earlier, Jim. It's just like an interesting point that we've mythologized and accepted myth as our way of political thought. It's scary, but I just propose it.
Mhm. Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Joe.
We don't usually go down that road, but I will just say, but there is something interesting that I think that there's something sometimes systemically wrong, and people try to explain that, they want an explanation. And so they come up with a myth or some kind of story that resonates, that's easy enough to believe. Therefore, it's just something that people then start to not care about the real issues. So, it is interesting how myths can be used to distract us. Like when we're so desperate, we're looking for something, that these myths provide. And you can go back even to the idea of religious myths, where, there's a flood or things along those lines, you need an explanation. I don't know. To me, I think that people gravitate towards myths in times of desperation.
Let me ask another question about modern times and myths. We've been studying Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, and the Gospel of John. And for me, it has been just a profound experience, because it's a different mindset. It's a different sensibility, which is very different from modern times. And it gives you a perspective. We're digging deep enough into them that we're getting a sense of what each of them are. And we are digging deep into 3 of them, which are very different from each other, from very different cultures, that we are able to see the commonality between them and contrasting it to the modern. So on this issue, on the myths and on symbols, how is the scribal age, thing that is common between these 3 works, how is it different from the modern age? What do you see as the difference? Any thoughts? Maritza.
I find the scribal age allowed more time for pondering, as it were. In the modern age, things are so rapid fire fast that there's often not time to digest what one is seeing or whatever new piece of information is presented to us before, there's like 20 more new pieces. I believe that in the scribal age, while there was vaster amounts of information than in the previous age, it was slower. We had a little more time to digest it than we do now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Next up is Jim, followed by Joe. Jim.
I'm normally very hesitant. I like your point, Maritza, and then I'm also very hesitant with it as well, because one of the things that I look at is we want to avoid over romanticizing the past and like, oh, it's a simpler time or something like that. And in some cases it is, many cases it is, and in many cases it's not. And I think that nuance is useful, because people in different times, like, Rousseau and Smith and all of them didn't know about social media. So there's that. And so I do appreciate the idea that, yes, it's simpler. And I like, and I do want to dial in on this idea that we had more time to digest it. And I think I'd ponder with 2 questions. Is it more time to digest it or more discipline to digest it?
If I can jump in just for a moment.
Please.
I did not use the word simpler. I'm not convinced I'm not convinced that that's a true statement,
Okay.
that it was simpler. But I would say that, the maybe it's a little bit of both of what you just said. It's more time to digest it, but also, it's the way I view it, it's the difference between knowing and understanding. If you're getting information from such a rapid fire stream, you there's never the pause where it can move from just assimilation into, the processing aspect that allows for some semblance of understanding. And so, I crack the joke and I tell people, oh, Google knows everything, but understands nothing. And that's what I find increasingly is what we're experiencing in this modern age today, that we did not have the same issue with other eras. They had their own problems, but they were different from this one.
Yeah, okay. So I think I think you and I kind of see eye to eye with that. And again, I'm not coming at or anything like that. I appreciate that. I think we're on the same page, and that idea is that there's nuances and people are digesting. And I think it kind of goes back to this idea of discipline too, but also it's not, but it's an and there's this idea associated with, earlier it was just a few people digesting, right? So I often wonder how many drafts of great works were written in the note pages of people that were never published. Where in today's society, we have this information, we have this architecture, this system that enables us to literally blast our thoughts out. Well, that's super useful and super not useful, right? Because there is no digesting, as you're kind of getting to, but we're also getting to a distributed cognition. Now it's not just one person who's thinking about this in some, quaint riverside somewhere, right? Or somewhere off in some mountain somewhere. Now it is the entire world thinking about these things. It is cognitive distribution to solving these problems. But the problem is, as people are thinking about it, it becomes word vomit or something like that. And there is none of that digesting. I think it's again, I don't want to go too far, but it's an interesting dilemma. So anyway, thank you.
Excellent point. Next up is Joe, Allison, and Paul. Joe.
I kind of forget what I was actually going to say. I mean, it was something along the lines with how we view science. I think it's a very different way, like between the scribal age and now. And we kind of view science as kind of absolute in truth. And I think that has an impact on how we view the differences between these two ages. There's no law of excluded metal, so to speak. So, I mean, that's the best way I can explain it, if you were to ask me.
Thank you. Allison.
I think the thing with the scribal age is that they didn't have a democracy. So it was assumed that most people were not educated. And now, it's good that we have democracies, but the idea though is, you have all these people who, they're not that well educated, but yet they vote. So then politicians have to find these little sound bites and symbols to try to take extremely complicated information and present it in a way that people think they understand it, so then they vote for it. But the fact is that they're not simple. Any issue that any government has to deal with is inherently very complex. And if you haven't spent a lot of time reading about these issues and really learning about it, how do you know what thing you want? I'm not to say that you have to have degrees to it, but you have to, you have to do your homework. You have to learn about it and read about it and try to understand them. And the thing is that they're not simple. They're just not. But we want simple. We want simple, easy, quick. We want McDonald's of politics, simple and quick. But just like McDonald's, if it's quick and easy, it's not that good. It's not. I mean, I do like the fries, but they're not really that good. Yeah.
Paul.
Well, we circle back to Jordan Peterson so much, but this, what you said, Joe, is just, it almost horrifies me all over again that people think of science as answering the same questions that they were trying to answer in the scribal era, when it does not. And that's been made many times over. And yet, so the society is sort of compassless, because as we know, science doesn't tell you how to live your life. It just mechanistically explains everything. So the difference, I don't really know back in the scribal era, how many people found the compass through those schools of thought that gave them the direction to live their life, or if they just lived day to day, you know. But it's not solved by science, and yet people have this perception that they can throw all that stuff out because they have science. And where does that leave us today? It leaves us with little groups like this thinking about the history of ideas, which is so important. I come back from this discussion usually with the need for new educational methods. So that's all I have to say.
Wonderful. Thank you. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that but people do use science to guide their lives. People use numbers as well to guide their lives. And so I think that what happens is that's where the simple answer, yes or no, that people are looking for. And I think that that's the distinction between the scribal age and now.
Can I interrupt? Do they use science to determine their values?
People do.
I don't know.
You don't think modernist thinkers use science to determine their values, or even utilitarians?
Some people are using TikTok.
The
Sam Harris is a big
greatest number is not science.
Well, it's a form. I would actually argue it's a form of some science. You're testing something, you come up with a hypothesis, and you're applying a value to it.
How do you decide if it's the best system?
This is the quintessential is-ought gap.
Right.
And then on top of that, it's also, and what science doesn't understand too, is it's also the problem of induction as well, because there's just so much that in a scientific experiment that we can't actually apply to real life, because everything that we do in real life is actually multifaceted, different things. And another topic that I always like to kind of bring up when I have this conversation or something to that effect is talk leadership to somebody and tell me how science improves leadership. Because oddly enough, leadership is one of those things you have to get out and do. So the proposition is gained through participating in the world and engaging with people and leading people and taking that responsibility and those and unfortunately owning those mistakes. But anyway, thank you.
I think Jordan Peterson puts the issue down really well. He says there are two ways of looking at life. You can look at life as a place of things or as a forum for action. And science mostly is about place of things. And all the scribal work is about regarding it as a forum for action. And there you have to really start with the question of who am I? That's not the question that science, modern science is focused on and has any way of approaching it. So that kind of the center is all about, like you look at Bhagavad Gita, you look at the Tao, right? I mean, Tao Te Ching will say, you can't really define Tao. There is a universal principle and you have to act in accordance, like Atma, it's the core of your being. That it's a different direction. And then you're saying, okay, what do I do with it? So I think it's a different feel. And that's what makes the scribal age different. I think the things that people are focused on are different. Like in my terminology, like we are very good, when to put it in terms of like causes, we're very good at efficient cause. We're very, very good at material cause. And we are so good, it's like orders of magnitude better than scribal age on both those causes, understanding. But final cause, I don't think so. Formal cause of saying, you know, what is the fundamental structure of your being? What gives meaning to your life? How is it all kind of hang together? I don't think the moderns have an answer to it. And they kind of mostly are kind of they distract themselves with a whole bunch of things so that they don't have to think about it. And like that's what TV is, I think, all about. A lot of the kind of passive entertainment, because it's like you're thinking you're doing something, your mind is doing something, it gives you an illusion, but it's actually not. So that's how I think about it. It's like the core is missing, the periphery is doing amazingly well. I mean, it's just, and I'm very grateful for it. Okay, I love the modern times for that, because I can, you know, in scribal time I would have been dead. You know, it's like the lifespan was 35 years or 30 years, something like that. So, but that's what I would say. All right, folks, this is such an amazing conversation. And Maritza, I think this group, the Poetry Mondays are doing so well. Really, really love them. And
I enjoy it.
yeah. So let me tell you about the meetups coming up. Tomorrow, we're going to be exploring Confucianism. We're going through Confucius Analects one by one, the books, chapters one by one. Jason and Amon are doing the translation for us. So it's wonderful to be able to kind of see what the characters are. This Wednesday, I'm going to be talking about the theme. I'm going to be talking about my favorite thinker, Sullivan, and integration of the physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, and moral. How, you know, what is involved in doing that? So it's going to be profound. It's going to be very challenging. Meetup. We're going to read from his book, Autobiography of an Idea, and the chapter is called Face to Face. His contention is that man has not even looked for himself and has not found himself. And what man truly is something quite spectacular. And a lot of the problems in the world come from people believing phantasms about kind of just fictions about what they are and what human beings are. And he goes to talk about what a human being is. So it is really profound. On Thursdays and Fridays, we are doing Bhagavad Gita. We are on chapter 11. So that's fantastic. All right, folks. So, and then next week, Mike will be here talking about technology. How can we use it well and not let it hurt us? So that's going to be a lot of fun. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. See you soon. Bye.